Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to talk about one major problem that I see with Halo's story, and with Halo's current story in particular, that kind of worries me because nobody seems to be talking about it. I never really see anyone discussing it. Now, it's not a problem with the writing quality, it's not a problem with the story direction, it's not a problem with, believe it or not, Cortana, it's not a problem with any of that. It's actually a problem with the Banished. Now, this might seem kind of backwards, considering that I and many others have been massively praising the idea of the Banished since we found out what they are. To me, the Banished are sort of like an actually interesting retake on the Covenant. I never found any of the Covenant remnants to be that interesting. They were sort of just more of the same, whereas the Banished are sort of like a new version of the Covenant with completely different goals, different motives, different backstories, and I love them. But there's a big problem with them, and more so, I'd say the Halo Wars 2 story arc that really isn't ever discussed. Now, we saw that Halo Wars 2 ended on a big cliffhanger, like worse than Halo 2, and in my opinion, worse than Halo 5, because at least in Halo 5 and Halo 2, we did get some sort of resolution for the battle that was going on. In Halo Wars 2, we kind of didn't. That said, we had two campaign DLCs that were on the way after the cliffhanger that we all assumed would at least provide some closure on that ending. And then Operation Spearbreaker, the first DLC, came around and it didn't resolve it, but everyone was like, okay, it's a $5 mini DLC, that's fine. Then Awakening the Nightmare came out, and as good as it was, that didn't resolve it either. In fact, Awakening the Nightmare for me made the problem even worse. It just exacerbated it because it showed that the Banished and the Spirit of Fire were still pretty much engaged in a very close battle, to the point where the Banished were having to scavenge what was likely going to be a flood hive to get an upper hand. So the two DLCs came and went, and we had no resolution to the cliffhanger at all, and that marked the end of Halo Wars 2's DLCs. Now, Halo Wars 2 as a game, I think, is completely over now, and the cliffhanger still persists. The war on the Ark is still going on. We have no idea who's in the lead, who's winning, what the current status of both sides are. We have no idea. Now, there are, of course, ways that they can resolve this, but I don't see any of them happening, and I can sort of see this Halo Wars 2 war on the Ark story arc kind of being stuck in limbo for quite a long time. Now, of course, it could be resolved in Halo Wars 3, but from what we know about, like, sales figures and stuff, Halo Wars 2 didn't do that great, which is kind of upsetting because for me, it was my favourite Halo game in like 7 or 8 years. But, you know, sales are sales, facts are facts, it didn't do all that great. So I don't think we're going to see Halo Wars 3, at least for a very long time. I mean, Halo Wars 2 did release during a period where the RTS genre is not dead, but it's like in cryo sleep, so I'm not exactly shocked that it didn't sell like millions upon millions of copies, but I think we'll get a Halo Wars 3 sometime down the line when RTS has become popular again. But anyhow, that doesn't help the fact that the story arc for Halo Wars 2 is still left in the open. They can't resolve it in Halo 6 because it goes against the idea that Halo 6 needs a simple story. So the reason that I say this is that Halo 5 had like 15 main characters, which is just fucking insane. That is way too many characters for a casual fan to keep track of, and it's way too many characters for the writers to actually flesh out in a 15 mission game and give a sense of existing and a sense of belonging to the story. Adding the Halo Wars characters on top of this, adding like another, at the very minimum, 5 more characters on top of that into the story, would make it even more complicated and messy at a time where 343 are getting criticised, sometimes rightly and sometimes wrongly, for having stories being too complicated. Adding that to the mix would make it way too messy. It'd also violate the idea that 343 want Halo 6 to be a more Chief-focused story. It'd be very hard to focus specifically on Chief when you've got 5 or 6 more characters just thrown into the mix. They also couldn't resolve it in a novel or a comic either, because again, this goes against that criticism that 343 stories require extra reading and background reading to fully understand. Again, I don't fully agree with that criticism, but it's a criticism nonetheless, And if 343 ended up resolving a video game story in a novel or a comic, that would be a very correct criticism. That, and in my opinion, it'd be downright stupid to end a video game story in a novel that very, very few of Halo's total fan base are gonna read. And on top of that, novels and comics aren't meant to be sort of like an extra part of a main story, at least for Halo. They've always been a way to add like background context and flesh out certain characters in ways that aren't required for the story, but they add like a nice little extra level of detail. Like for example, Rise of Atriox, the comics that we had detailing Atriox and the Banished backstory, they were fucking awesome. They did a fantastic job at fleshing out the Banished as a faction and the characters within the Banished, and also showing how they formed and the overall history of the Banished. That was a fantastic use of comics and extra material, but by no means should they ever be used to round off a game's story. Now, this also creates another pretty big problem for Halo 6 too. It means that for Halo 6's story, the arc has to be completely out of bounds, because if the Halo Wars 2 characters can't be in Halo 6, then neither can the arc, and if we were to go to the arc in Halo 6, while the war on the arc is still going on, and for some reason not encounter the Spirit of Fire or the Banished, or have no idea that there was even a war going on, it'd seem very weird and almost like the two stories were on different timelines. Of course, the only way they could fix this is if they resolved the Halo Wars 2 story before Halo 6 came out, but like we've said so far in this video, that's looking very difficult and very unlikely. So the other day, I was discussing this idea on Discord with my patrons, and we sort of threw a few ideas around as to how they could maybe fix this. Now, these ideas, I'm going to mention them here, but they are very, very unlikely. Do not expect either of these things to happen. I just figured they'd be sort of worth mentioning. So the first one was an ODST, like, spiritual successor set on the Ark versus the Banished. So you play as maybe one of the ODSTs in Sunray Squad from the first DLC from Halo Wars 2, and you fight the latter part of the war against the Banished, and then at the end of the campaign, you see how the war resolves. Maybe that'd happen, I don't know, a spin-off carrying on from another spin-off would be kind of weird, but you never know. The other idea, which I think is extremely unlikely, is that the Spielberg TV show would be the sort of latter part of the war, and that it'd show how the war on the Ark was resolved, and who won, the Banished or the Spirit of Fire. But yeah, like I said, I don't expect that to happen. I expect the Spielberg show to be completely disconnected from any modern Halo story. I can see it being something maybe set during the Human Covenant War. I don't know, but that's just some speculation. Now, I could be getting way too paranoid here, and 343 could have some totally sound way to resolve the war on the Ark. But from where I'm stood, it doesn't exactly look like there's any way they could do it without creating a dilemma or breaking one of the rules that they've set for Halo's story going forward. If you have any ideas of your own, then please leave them in the comments. There might be something really, really obvious that I missed, or a way that they could resolve the story in a way that's so obvious and I completely glossed over it. So please, let me know in the comments. I want to give a big thank you to The Ardent Prayer, Chris G, Jack Cook, Jack Madden, and every single other patron for the hugely, hugely generous support. If you want to help support me further, then my Patreon link is at the top of the description. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.